All right, some reviews on Gary's benefit. That's okay. Not for his benefit. My benefit after conversation with him. Something I forgot to mention very briefly about communicating encouragement. Remember I said encourage communication and communicate encouragement. And I said up here might be encouraging, but what we speak to one another, I wouldn't say privately, but one-on-one or outside of this role is also helpful. And I just wanted to remind us that we can speak encouraging things to one another when assembly's over, before assembly begins. One of the things that I noticed shortly after I married Janice, and we would spend time at her family's places of assembly, whatever you want to call them, is that the conversation before and afterwards never, ever strayed. Maybe with the women when there was a health issue or somebody was wearing the smock and so people knew that somebody was expecting and that kind of thing. But certainly on the men's side, the conversation never revolved around what was specifically discussed during their period of worship or other biblical things. And that impressed me. It did. I'm not saying it made them perfect or without error or whatever, but the point was is that it is their habit. When they're together, they don't seem to discuss work, certainly not entertainment because they don't have any, which is something else to perhaps consider. But generally speaking, their conversation really revolved around spiritual things when they were talking together afterwards, and I was impressed by that. And that is not my habit, certainly least of all in this room. It's probably least my habit. And I understand talking about other things that are even serious. I appreciate Steve. He asks about work. Why does he do that? Because work is kind of what we revolve around, to a great extent. And I'm not saying that is inaccurate or wrong, but certainly we can spend the time as well continuing to discuss spiritual things as we mill about, you might say. Let's talk about the word just for a moment. As you may recall, last week I had discussed the word just and the word holy, and then I got into Revelation and lost my spot. You remember that? I did have the right verse there, but I was using a translation I wasn't as familiar with. So I wanted to review this again really quickly. When we talk about in Titus, the verse 8, Titus 1:8, but an elder should be hospitable, loving what is good, sensible, just, devout, and self-controlled. That word just, for a moment, is 1342. It means equitable, and it is from 1349, a judicial decision, a suit at law, or a sentencing. That is what that word means. But then it moves on to the word holy. The word holy shows up, and actually in the one I am reading, I didn't see it there. Everyone's good, self-control. I should go back and look at it in my ESV. Does the word holy show up? It does, okay, because that is the other one that I use here. So the word holy is there. So I went to Revelation, and I'll do that again in just a moment, but this was the point I was trying to make. Holy. This word holy that was appearing here, particularly in the ESV, they're not really sure what it means. It is not the 1342, which is more referring to human, not absolutely, but it's not specifically referring to human law. And it is not denoting formal consecration. It's not this holy either. It's not the set apart word. Does that make sense? And it's used many places, and there's nuance there. Perhaps I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. But the word is more a sense, so it does not denote formal consecration such as hallowed, but it is translated shall be in that Revelation verse. So if you turn to Revelation 16, which is again something that appears in the King James, and I meant to grab, do we have a King James up here somewhere? Is that what we keep in back? I don't remember what we keep back. No, we have a King James. If you turn to Revelation 16 and verse 5, I did have the correct verse, so you can pull that off of the list of mistakes I made last week. A different kind of mistake. Revelation 16 and verse 5. And I heard the angels of the water saying, righteous are you, remember that righteous, who are and who were, and the King James says, and who shall be, O Holy One, instead of O Holy One here. It says, and shall be, because you judge these things. It's referring back to the righteous in the King James. And who was and who is and who shall be, they translate here, O Holy One. And that's what threw me off. So it's the same holy there. And it's referencing a state of being. It's part of who you are. Jesus shall be righteous. He is these things. And so that's what that holy is, as opposed to specifically called out or set apart, or as opposed to the just, which is a similar word. And again, all of that may not have been particularly necessary here, but it was important to me for whatever reason. Okay, some additional review about the word drunkard. Gary noticed that I skipped over it a little bit last week, so I'll look at it a bit more closely now. About different translations of this word that appears in verse, I'm still in, I need to get back to my Titus. Titus 1:7. For an overseer must be above reproach as God's steward, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not addicted to wine, not pugnacious, not fond of sordid gain. All right, so the word drunkard. In the ESV, it is the word drunkard. In the New American Standard, what I'm reading out of, it is addicted to wine. In the King James Version, it is not given to wine. This word here that is translated these different ways is made up of two different words. And that is the word, let me say, so the combination of these two words only appears twice. Here, and when the conversation is being had about elders in 1 Timothy. Perhaps this is not important that it only shows up twice because there are so many similar versions of it, it might not matter. But 1 Timothy 3:3, not addicted to wine or pugnacious. So word for word, the same between these two. That is translated this way. These are the two places it shows up. It comes from 38:44, which is near or besides. This is where we end up getting the addicted from or given. Given too much wine, addicted, this is it. Near or besides. And then the other word is wine. Here's where it gets interesting to me. This is the same word as John 2, wherein the wedding, right? At the wedding, Jesus turned the water into wine. Same word. It's the same word. It's also the same word as Ephesians 5:18. Turn there very quickly. Ephesians 5:18. Do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. I don't want to take terribly long here, so I'm not going to investigate this more closely. But for the sake of the argument only, in terms of these words, 38:44 and 36:31, either Jesus provided alcohol at the wedding, which a lot of people disagree with, and I understand that argument, or elders should be wary of grape juice. Or that word is used of both alcoholic and non-alcoholic grape juice. And I can accept that more easily perhaps than I can the others. But my point is this: if there's an argument to be made about drunkenness and what the word wine means, I wouldn't use this word and I wouldn't go to this verse to make the argument this way, at least this word. So,
because of the ambiguity.
Because of the ambiguity of the word. I'm not saying that the argument can't be made, and I'm treading lightly here because I don't feel like I'm prepared to make the argument. However, I wouldn't use the word wine from this verse because of the ambiguity. So, that leaves another word, which is this near or besides. If you're going to go here to try to make the argument, you're working with the word that means near or besides and is translated addicted or given to. In which case, there is where I would suggest going if you wanted to use this verse to start making that argument. Comments? Man, I wish Gary was here. The only thing I'm trying to teach from here is myself to remember to be cautious with words. Obviously this is a dangerous place to go, right? And Lee has made the argument, I'd say very well, and I still don't fully understand it. I would say this is an impossible alternative to come to, considering what other commandments exist in Scripture. So, if you wanted to go to Ephesians 5:18 to have a conversation about what drunkenness is or the need to stay away from wine, I would suggest that perhaps over using Titus. That's really the only point I'm trying to make right now. I've got a couple of blank stares. Anybody wanna? No takers. Okay. When Gary walks in, I might back it up.
18, I think is a strong Ephesians 5:18, this is a very strong way of dealing with that part.
It's pretty,
How it is, if you could also go back into Proverbs and things like that, and dealing with mixed ones and stuff like that, if you had to deal with trying to find out more. But
I have not yet met a person I respect who suggests, sorry, that was an unfortunate pause, I did not intend that. I have not yet met a person I respect who suggests that drunkenness is okay. Okay. And I have certainly many people I respect suggest that for alcohol to pass your lips is not okay. That is where the disagreement lies. And again, all I'm really trying to say from this is that these words, certainly the word wine is ambiguous in this verse. In this verse it is. So then the question remains in terms of an eldership. What do you want for an elder? So, if somebody takes a loose interpretation of this, well, it's okay so as long as I'm still able to drive. Perhaps not eldership material, which is the point that we were making last week, that sometimes caution, obviously, is going to be very helpful here. People respect the ones, I'm not trying to make this about me. People that we respect are the ones that we're looking towards in terms of eldership material. We look at the mature and the experienced. And I think that they would probably take a very serious approach to what this verse is saying, certainly on the more conscious end. But continuing with the conversations about elders to wrap up the subject, at least here. By the time we get to verse 9, what we're dealing with here, we're discussing the purpose of an elder. Holding firm to the word, let's just read verse 9 again. Hold fast the faithful word, which is in accordance with the teaching, so that he will be able to both exhort in sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict. So he's supposed to instruct, encourage in the truth, and he's supposed to rebuke, discouraging, that is halting error. Right? You don't just kind of discourage it. No, I wouldn't do that if I were you. No, it's got to stop. It's got to stop. Those are his two responsibilities. So one of the things that I found interesting as we studied this, and I referenced it last week, is the fact that as you look at the qualifications for elders, I started thinking about the qualifications for priests and the standard which prophet kings, because we're looking at a leadership role here, right? Everybody would agree with that? Who is going to lead this body of people in terms of wisdom and guidance and shepherding? It's a leadership role. So, leaders, and the discussion that you could have now about leadership and the qualifications for those who are in a leadership role. What do we know already from Scripture? Obviously, we have high standards of character involved here, and there were supposed to be high standards of character in the Old Testament as well. Turn to Deuteronomy. The ultimate point that I'm trying to make here, 2 points, twofold. One is that the standard for leaders is very high. And also the standard for leaders is very old. It really hasn't changed. When God wants a leader for his people, he points us towards people who meet the standard regardless of the testament that we are in. There's even perhaps some stricter standards in the New Testament. Example, Deuteronomy 17 and verse 14. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. Well, there's a pretty high standard on its own. One from among your countrymen you shall set as king over yourselves. Now here's some specific requirements. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves, who is not your countryman. There's a slight parallel here to the concept of, excuse me, my phone is ringing. Very odd. So, do not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. This sort of reminds me of shepherd the flock among you, as we discussed last week. Look, it needs to be someone from among you. It may not be somebody from outside the group. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, which is not a requirement for an elder, but the point ultimately is the same. Nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. Verse 17, he shall not multiply wives for himself, the husband of one wife. Not what it says here, it's what it says in the New Testament. Or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. What have we discussed already about the elder and his desire for earthly wealth? Okay, those standards are somewhat similar. Keep your thumb in Deuteronomy for a second. Actually, let's just go ahead and turn there now since we're so close. Deuteronomy 13. Deuteronomy 13 and verse, let's start with 1. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or wonder, and the sign of the wonder comes true concerning which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods whom you do not know, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to find out if you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall follow the Lord your God and fear him. You shall keep his commandments, listen to his voice, serve him, and cling to him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has counseled rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you from the land of Egypt, and redeemed you from the house of slavery, to seduce you from the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. So you shall purge the evil from among you. All right, so when selecting a leader, it's supposed to be somebody who knows the truth. When you have a prophet come along who is not the same kind of a leader, but they were supposed to look up to in terms of guidance and direction, and they teach something that is false, this person is unqualified, and in the Old Testament was supposed to be put to death. In the New Testament, an unqualified person who is not able to exhort, teach, or rebuke is not a qualified elder. Is not qualified to be an elder. So when it comes to selecting a leader, let me scroll down my notes a little bit further here. When it comes to selecting a leader and understanding the importance of their ability to exhort and rebuke, if you look over in Galatians really quickly, you see this concept of, look, if somebody brings to you something that they claim is truth but is not, reject it immediately. Galatians 1, 8, and 9, you'll remember this. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached to you, he is to be accursed. As we have said before, so I say again now, if any man is preaching to you a gospel contrary to what you have received, he is accursed. You must wonder if the scribe here wrote down the same sentence twice, right? But the idea is that he's making the emphasis. For am I now seeking the favor of men or God? For I am striving to please, or am I striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. We've been in Jeremiah. We'll be in Jeremiah again in just a moment. What was the thing that they're always dealing with? The false prophets who were telling the people what they wanted to hear. This person is not a qualified leader. So, person is qualified. We had a brief conversation last week about what do you do about the fact that nobody is, everybody, we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. It was meant to be a practical discussion about if we're in a situation where we can start selecting elders, how do we go about handling concerns people may have about an individual? So, for example, do we select an elder who has deep personal debt? Let's say we know he's up to his eyeballs in debt. Is this somebody who we feel like is good management material over the group, leadership material? What about an elder who, as a 65-year-old, seems very stable, but as a 27-year-old, I'm not putting myself out there for any reason other than the criticism that is perfectly viable, right? At what point do you make decisions based upon where this person is at now? How much criticism do we take about past sins? What is his attitude towards those things? Let me check really quickly here. I had a note to continue the concept here about selecting leaders and what we know that looks like from Scripture. Back in the Old Testament again, actually I won't even make you turn there. Consider the standards that we have. Let me read them one more time from Titus 1. An overseer must be above reproach as God's steward, verse 7. Not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not addicted to wine, not pugnacious, not fond of sordid gain, but hospitable, loving what is good, sensible, just, devout, self-controlled. holding fast to the faithful word which is in accordance with the teachings, so that he will be able to exhort sound doctrine and refute those who contradict. Okay, so Old Testament, we're talking about leaders, the kings. We just read a moment ago about standing for a king. Would David, though he was a king, qualify as an elder? By the New Testament standard? No. Saul? Solomon? Who else do I have on my list? Noah? He was drunk at one point. Okay, now does that one thing prohibit him? Okay, how old was he when he got out of the ark? 700, he died at 900, so we get another 200 years. No, I mean, whatever it was. Okay, but would he have been qualified? Perhaps Moses? How often did Moses, who God selected, make a mistake? I mean, when God selected him, he told him no. So in that sense alone, as we discussed last week, well, he's an unwilling nominee, so he would be unqualified by the New Testament standards. Can you think of anybody? Abraham? Maybe? We're getting there?
He was lying. With other people, he was lying. He began his work lying.
Yeah, so we have some dishonesty that occurred there. I mean, as you start thinking, you find men here who have character flaws. And one of the points I want to make is that in my limited understanding, I feel like that is going to be the case to some extent for anybody that you are looking at here. One of the ones that I thought was a pretty good example might be Joseph.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about the temptation that he avoided and the sufferings that he went through because he specifically made the right decision. Okay, Potiphar's wife, what happened to him in the jail. We've been going through the story of Joseph with the children, and I've been thinking in this context, well, this guy's pretty impressive. You know, I don't feel like he gets, you know, he's not a patriarch in the sense we think about it. But I mean, and you know, of course, his name falls off the list of the 12 tribes, and so we just don't think of him as being an enormous character. He's there and he's influential, but he has a better track record than David does in terms of sexual immorality that we know about. You know, refuses to lie. He's a pretty good guy. Isaac, some pretty significant trouble there. Jacob, if you think about the 12 sons of Israel and the ones other than Joseph, and you can think about the specific instances of some of the heinous sins they committed, are these people eldership material by the New Testament standard? It's hard to find. It's hard to find one. However, they still ended up being leaders, and in many instances, obviously, I mean, David's a perfect example, did excellent, wonderful things. Okay, in fact, he's the standard, the good standard by which the rest of the kings are kind of held up to. Just like Jeroboam and Rehoboam are the poor standard that all the others are supposed to rise above. So this, again, leaves me in the quandary from last week. So we're dealing with imperfect men who are supposed to come to this exceptionally high standard. How does that play out? And it's a question. I don't really have an answer. It's the only question. Yes, John.
I have an answer on some of that.
Okay.
Where to pick a person who's qualified. Sins of the youth, if they've been taken care of and worked out in the wisdom of becoming older and older, help an elder decide, all right, this is what I did in my youth. Hey, wait, this person may be the best person because they could say, this is how I got over it. They have the experience to tell somebody the best things for that. And as you were saying, a 27-year-old rash person with their children, 65-year-old, well, even all of us are.
Well, and
but a 65-year-old is good, and he's calm now. I pray I am that way.
And if I was 65, like I did last week, then I would be unqualified. Okay. Hopefully, by the time I'm 65, hopefully by the time any of us are 65, that has been weeded out, right?
And David and all these people picked by God. David in his rash youth, and all that, but later on, God forgave him, and so that sin was gone. So later on, when he's 60, 70. Was he still rash? See, that's the part where we don't see.
Right.
I mean, we know that. We know Noah's one sin. We know all these things. But
I mean, the Bible's cautionary tale, isn't it?
well, those examples are there for saying, hey,
Right.
wait, These people are considered a moral hall of fame. They are examples for us to say, hey, that even though they weren't perfect, God helped them.
Gary, really quickly to back up, you were not here. We talked about drunkenness very briefly. I'll just say this as a summary. The word drunkenness, as it shows in 1 Timothy 3:3, only or in Titus, only shows up in the same form in 1 Timothy 3:3, in the exact same form. It's a combination of two words, 38:44, which is near and besides, and 36:31, which is the word wine. That word wine is the same one that is used when Jesus was at Cana. And so then you're in a situation here, which way do you want to use that word? So I move on from this word to the word that discusses near and besides. What does that mean exactly? And that's as far as I went, and I moved on. I didn't try to draw any conclusions beyond that, other than the fact that the discussion about drunkenness probably should come from another verse for more clarity, because the word wine there is pretty ambiguous. So, and we can talk about it later. I don't think we're in specific disagreement or anything, but that's as far as my understanding would take me. So, before we move on from elders very briefly, any comments about that? We're going to get a little bit more into the purpose in just a moment, but this is kind of where we divert a little bit. Yes, Stephen?
I guess when you're talking about how people are rash when they're younger and stuff, that's why I think it's here, maybe the first verse where it says, don't appoint somebody to the position of an elder, like basically like right after they become
A Christian, yeah, that's right.
After they become a Christian, lest they be tossed out and be mature.
Okay, so continuing the discussion about the purpose of elders, you'll notice in verse 10 of Titus, which I lost again, for there are many rebellious men. Okay, so why are we having a discussion about why it is so important? Twofold here, don't let me confuse you. Why is it so important that there be elders? Rebellious men. Why is it so important you have a strict standard when you choose elders? Rebellious men. Okay, you're in danger of not protecting against rebellious men. In fact, you're in danger of appointing a rebellious man as an elder. So the context of eldership plays very heavily in the next few verses we are reading. Dad, could you read 10 through 16? Please.
The ESV. For there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers, and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. They must be silenced, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not to teach. One of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. Therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and the commands of people who turn away from the truth. To the pure all things are pure, but to the defiled and unbelieving nothing is pure. But both their minds and their consciences are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work.
Well, yeah, that's a little unequivocal, is it not? False teachers. They are threatening the church. So, one thing I can learn from this already is false teachers threaten the church, right? Rebellious men, and we need to be on guard to this. It was important in Titus' time. It is important now. They are insubordinate, in direct contrast to the elder who is described as not a self-willed person. This is a self-willed person. The eldership said not self-willed, not rebellious, or submissive would be the positive approach to that. Okay? So he is insubordinate. They are empty talkers. Boy, oh boy, does George need to watch himself. Deceivers. A point that I like to make about deception is that sin never has a chance without deception. It never has a chance without deception there to make it look good. Nobody wants what sin has to offer. Nobody wants the behavior that it produces. Nobody wants the feelings it produces. So it repackages itself as something else. Hence the need for deception. Sin cannot survive without it. But, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Which is why so much emphasis is placed on Scripture in identifying it. Because it is deceptive by its very nature. Notice, though, in this list, who are the rebellious men? They are empty talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision. Okay, who must be silenced. It doesn't mention them here, and I'm not saying you can make an absolute point here, but it's interesting that they don't say that they're ignorant or unknowledgeable. And I think that might be worth noting the concept here that we might be, I mean, if they're deceptive, they've got some sort of understanding, okay? You have to know your market. If you're going to sell somebody something, do you not? You have to understand your product too. And if you're going to deceive somebody this way, you have to understand something first. Satan didn't come along and say, Eve, I know God said not to, but you're allowed to disobey him. He said what? God. He knew what God meant, did he not?
God told you that.
Is Satan knowledgeable? Satan is knowledgeable. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that knowledge is not enough. And we see this in the qualifications for eldership. We're talking about men here, they're discussing spirit things. Verse 9 discusses their knowledge, their handle that. But when it comes to how they approach people in terms of their heart, their spirit, we see gentleness, kindness, and love in those qualifications as you explore those further. So, and then they are of the circumcision party. This is what we're dealing with explicitly at this day and age as Paul is writing to Titus. This concept that you have to follow specifically the law of Moses, and perhaps even more specifically the law of circumcision to be a Christian. And how long has Paul been dealing with this? You know, this is just nothing new. Let's see here. Yeah, the warning is not new. Look at Matthew 7 really quickly. When Jesus is discussing the concern of false teachers, Matthew 7:15, beware of the false prophets who come to you deceitfully, is what's going on here. As wolves in sheep's clothing, that is deceitfully. But inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? No, they are not. Acts 20. Acts 20 and verse 29. I know that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves will arise, speaking perverse, and another interpretation of that word would be deceptive. Deceptive things, to draw away disciples after them. So their purpose is shameful gain, as we see in Titus, and right here in what I read, draw men after them. They want to be followed. That's what's going on. False teachers want to be followed. If you go ahead and go back to Titus, I'm bouncing all over the place this morning. Verse 11, false teachers who must be silenced because they are upsetting whole families, teaching things they should not teach for the sake of sordid gain. And you might look at that and think it's a matter of, well, if somehow find a way to make money off of what they teach, and that might be true. But it's really the sense of self-promotion altogether, whether it's being followed, revered, respected in some way that is not consistent with their peers. It's simply a matter of self-promotion, regardless of how that occurs. That's what we're looking at. If you look at John 12, we're getting our mileage in today. John 12 and verse 19. The motivation of the Pharisees to lead the people from Christ. So the Pharisees said to one another, you see that, they said to one another, so you see that we are doing no good. Look, the world has gone after him. I made this point a little while back, a couple Bible classes back. They don't understand that Christ is no different than they are in his purpose, to some extent. They look to me as a spiritual leader, and they see Jesus doing the same thing and don't really seem to be able to attribute to him any more than that at times. That is where their hardness of the heart plays in there. They're looking at him and going, oh, he's starting up another sect. Right? He wants people following him just like we want people following us, and it's just a petty battle between who's going to get followers. Right? They didn't understand. I don't say this is an absolute rule, but apparently one of the things they did not always understand is that Christ had a greater purpose than what they did. Matthew 27 and verse 18. It was even obvious to Pilate. Meaning that because of envy, he had been handed over. Christ had been handed over to him. It wasn't because he did anything wrong. It was because they were envious. So, what do we know about false teachers? Particularly the Pharisees and those who came from a Jewish background that would be preaching something like the circumcision or obedience to the law of Moses, shameful gain, things they want for themselves. Quick question for you, real question. These characteristics, insubordinate, empty talkers, deceivers, as you read this again in Titus, for there are many rebellious men, empty talkers and deceivers, especially those in circumcision. Are those attributes meant to indicate a single person? There's an insubordinate person, and there will also be an empty talker, and there will also be a deceiver, and you need to avoid all three of them. Or is it, when you run into any man who is a false teacher, he will probably exhibit all of these. And I'm inclined to think the second one, even if not all, I hardly imagine you'll run into one of those characteristics without discovering another. In other words, I think Titus is describing one type of person, there's many of them, rather than three types of people that each show a different trait. The thing that I would learn from that, if that is indeed the case, is that when you meet somebody who seems to be unsubmissive, and then you feel like you're noticing that they might be deceptive, you might be onto something there. Because these things describe the same type of person. Gary?
But that person may be the insubordinate, the empty talker, the deceiver, may be that way because of lack of knowledge.
That's true.
You know,
That's true.
now there's a hard issue when the knowledge part of that person, they still choose.
Knowledge is necessary.
That's right.
It's absolutely necessary.
Absolutely necessary.
It's not the only thing that is necessary.
Very, very necessary. Because there are.
And again, Satan is a good example. I mean, he had the knowledge, obviously. Even the demons know and believe, right?
That's right.
So their effect is that they are upsetting whole families. Turn back to Jeremiah. We were here recently, and I was kind of reminded of this. It says they're upsetting whole families. And this word isn't as distinct as it looks here. It's not talking about simply blood relation, family. It is talking about an association. The word is sometimes translated home or house. 23:16. 23:16. Thus says the Lord of hosts. Now, okay, we've been studying Jeremiah. And what is the context? Jeremiah goes to them and is surrounded by false prophets, one way or the other, who say, what Jeremiah teaches you is not true. Listen to what I say instead. You won't be conquered. You're not in trouble, that sort of thing. Thus says the Lord of hosts. Do not listen to the words of the prophets who are prophesying to you. What is their effect, is what George is asking right now. They are leading you into futility. They speak a vision of their own imagination, not from the mouth of the Lord. They keep saying to those who despise me, as the Lord has said, you will have peace. And as for everyone who walks in the stubbornness of his own heart, they say calamity will not come upon you. Okay, so one of the effects of false teachers is they say, look, your sin is okay. And as sin sits there and festers and the devil does his work and nobody tries to drive it out, it just gets worse and worse and worse, and the thing implodes upon itself, right? So I just think this is a parallel. In the family of Israel, when the false prophets were there, look what happened. When the false teachers are in the church, look what happens. None of this is new. That's basically the point I'm trying to make. Okay, sorry, I'm still figuring out this new. There we go. So, continuing the conversation in Titus, how to handle false teachers. Why would that come up first? Watch this. We'll get there. Okay, so what happens here? Paul first seems to call out cultural root problems, and this is a difficult verse. I would welcome comment here. Where has Titus been left by Paul? On Crete. What does Paul say about the Cretans? What do we say? I get confused. It's Cretans?
I don't know. Look at Cretans.
One of themselves, that is, one of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. First point I can make is that there's a place for Paul to say that, even if there's not a place for me to say it. How about that? And Paul said it, and that is I'm standing up here to condemn Paul. No. Paul said that. What Paul said is accurate. I stand by what Paul said, and I believe what Paul said. That doesn't mean that I should volunteer that opinion myself. So, what can we learn about the point that he's making here. He's identifying and calling out cultural root problems. He's saying this belongs to them as a group of people. He's stereotyping, and he's stereotyping. Okay, he's painting them all with a broad brush. I mean, how many terms would you like to come up with that is seen as an evil thing today?
He's quoting a source, an extra biblical
Yeah.
source, probably Epimenides. Okay, I mean, I think they have found this quote from
Okay.
this writer.
Maybe more than one person
And
said
so it's a widespread belief
yeah,
that the
and this is the way you are.
Yeah.
So, what is his purpose in doing this? I believe he's trying to say, look, if this is the way you are, these are the problems you need to solve. What do we know about Corinth? When you think of Corinth and the sin there, when you think of specific sin that had to be dealt with, we can't we? Right? So, what are the Cretans particularly prone towards? Lying, evil, gluttony. That one perhaps doesn't apply necessarily so much at this point. Lying, evil, and gluttony. Let's leave it at that for a moment. We could explore what those are. We're well acquainted enough. It's interesting to me, after all the qualifications or non-qualifications he mentioned for elders, the gluttony appears in this way here, just like this, as opposed to drunkenness, for example. You know, gluttony didn't really appear in the other, but gluttony is in line with lying and evil, and I don't think that we're necessarily the type that approach it that way. Something to keep in mind. About that time already. All right, lying, evil, and gluttony. And so one of the things that needs to be done as you're approaching the concept of false teachers is to recognize where it comes from, and that's harsh. That's difficult to do, but Paul did it. We should be cautious, but it can be done. And then there's this question of the pursuit of Jewish myths and man-made commandments, and this is sort of interesting here. For this reason, this is verse 13, this testimony is true. For this reason, reprove them severely so that they may be sound in the faith, not paying attention to Jewish myths and the commandments of men who turn away from the truth. This must be silenced. And it says to rebuke severely. Some translations say sharply here. So I want to just discuss really quickly what this rebuke severely means, because it sounds pretty harsh. And here he is certainly not pulling, I hate to say it that way, pulling any punches. However, when you look at this word, it could mean severely in the sense we think of it, although I think we've perverted a little bit. When we think severe, we think angry, ugly, sometimes. The word also means give it your immediate attention. This is not something that can be allowed to take hold. So severely doesn't have to mean harshly so much as it means you're guarding, and you're guarding quick. You knock it out like that. Okay? You see it coming, and the moment the line is crossed, you don't, well, assess, judge, let it grow. Okay, now we think we're getting something. No. When you see sin enter, get rid of it. That's one of the concepts buried in the word severely here as it's used in Scripture. Ephesians 4:27. Well, this is a short verse. Back up to 26. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not give the devil an opportunity. Okay, don't give him an opportunity. Don't let it even start growing. Cut it off at the root as quickly as you can. I would say, because Mom would say, nip it in the bud. Nip it in the bud. Go ahead, Gary.
A great example of that, Acts chapter 15, the debate over circumcision of the law of Moses. When these men came down there, what was Paul's response? Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them.
Right.
I mean,
And
they were arguing it out. I mean,
right, and it doesn't necessarily provide an illustration of their attitudes.
Right.
It does express a sense of their sobriety, the importance of taking care of it immediately, the seriousness with which they handle this. Look, this has appeared and we're going to get rid of it. Right now, right away, top priority. Not necessarily, I couldn't use this to excuse an angry attitude toward somebody who has sinned, for example. Yes, Dominic.
Quickly back up to the stereotyping thing. You've just been talking about with the insubordinate empty talkers and deceivers, how in order to do what they're probably trying to do, they have to know who you're talking to. And then it gets down to this, and you have to know who you're talking to. The people being described as blind, evil, and gluttonous aren't, I think it's fair to say, generally spiritually minded people, extremely physically minded. And I think it's the Bereans who are more honorable than whoever else who are spiritually minded people.
contribution or something
And isn't
like
that more and more the case, where you really have to discuss facts of logic and common principles in terms of what morality is before you can get into the details?
But if you don't know who you're going to try to teach to, Titus, then you could very easily start in a bad place that,
In other words, Paul is saying these are square one people,
yeah.
right? John, did you have something?
Case creations. We'll talk about, we'll talk about teachers in it, because I don't know if they're, well, we know the culture he's talking about. They seem to like to talk before. When you rebuke sharply, you don't have to talk. Maybe that gets their attention.
No,
Well, that's just my thought.
So I really want to try to finish up this section. Verse 15, to the pure all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving nothing is pure. But both their mind and their conscience are defiled. So I used to use this verse to refer to anything, not anything, but so for example, I'm at work, I say a phrase, everybody starts snickering, I'm like, what did I say? And it turns out I unconsciously, what's the word for it? It's a like innuendous, or innuendo. And I had no idea, because I had no idea. And I think in general the concept applies, but that's probably not what he's describing here. He is very briefly discussing the question of something like meat sacrificed to idols. For example, again, these Jewish laws creeping in to their Christian lives. To the pure, all things are pure. In other words, that meat doesn't matter anymore. Okay, if you want to understand this more, go back and read Galatians and Colossians. I gave you more detail there. In fact, this might be one of the few points where we can recognize that Paul shortened it. He didn't spend that whole time writing and rehashing something like, boy, Paul, you go on forever, and moves on to the pure, all things are pure. Look, you don't have to worry about that meat sacrifice to an idol anymore. Okay, but go read Romans, go read Ephesians, go read Galatians, go read Colossians, to understand that these extra rules are of no benefit to you, though they may look like it, they are man-made. Ethan.
Maybe wrapping up what he brought up the Jewishness and the man-made commandments in the verse before that.
Exactly.
He brought it up, and then he says, you don't have to worry about it.
He has the Jewish false teachers in mind.
Right, that's right. But to the pure, all things are pure. So even though I don't think this is specifically referring to any cultural sin, I think you probably could apply it that way, because there's truly innocent, Ernie and Bert on Sesame Street. To the pure, all things are pure, until somebody defiled came along and decided something else that nobody pure ever saw. For example. Also consider the fact that those that are defiled can never be satisfied. Nothing is pure. To those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but both their minds and their consciences are defiled. 2 Timothy 3:13, I specifically remember discussing this when we were studying this. 3:13, evil men and impostors will proceed from bad to worse. If you are trying to satisfy a person, an entity, and you choose to obey God, He has set a standard for you that you can aim for and meet with His grace and mercy, and it is clear cut. With an evil person, if you follow evil, it's never going to reach a point where you know you have done enough for the evil. Evil can never be satisfied. Consequences of permitting false teachers in is innocence lost. Well, I guess I'd still hang around verse 15. The pure, all things are pure. So what happens when the defiled come in? They are no longer pure, right? Defilement is introduced to the group. Detestable, disobedient, unfit people are claiming Christ, which really becomes if you'll forgive me using the word this way, a more mature version of damage, because it takes the others first, right? Sin comes into the group, and then once it's really gotten strong and healthy, right, the world starts noticing it too, okay? Was there a time when the Jewish people were obedient? Was there a time where they were no longer, right? And then there was a time where people like Pilate could look at them and go, you've got to be kidding me. And it takes more time to get there, but it will get there eventually. That's the outcome. Christ's name is slandered. This is where our sin leads us. This is kind of an ultimate consequence that occurs, regardless of the physical consequences that we may experience. Okay, what is our responsibility and what happens when we sin? Eventually, this is what happens when we sin. Gary and Lee both like to say, did you think when you started to sin, this is where you'd end up? No, you didn't, but sin is never satisfied. Yeah?
No, that's all right, you said it.
And severe handling. Okay? It comes in, get it out. Cut it off. How many verses could we go to? You know, I knew I needed to wrap it up anyway, so we're not going to do it. But, okay, if your eye causes you to sin, get rid of it. Get rid of it. Go ahead, Gary. Come on.
You're right, I mean, you know, their disobedience is shown by in their works. Their works are detestable to God, they're not able to do good works because their minds are wrapped up in doing good deeds.
Right. And look at the ultimate consequence of that. Any other comments before we break for a few minutes? Appreciate your participation. We'll be picking up then in chapter 2, Lord willing, next week. Thank you.